This week, President Trump nominated conservative Judge Brett Kavanaugh to fill a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court that will become vacant when Justice Anthony Kennedy retires at the end of the month. Mr. Kavanaugh is currently a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. News reports show that New Mexico's congressional delegation is split across party lines on the president's pick, with GOP elected officials and candidates praising the choice and Democrats expressing grave concern. Here with me to talk about this and other topics of the week are attorney Mary T. Torres. Merritt Allen is back with us from Vox Optima LLC. Yay! Former State Senator Eric Griego is with us. Well, welcome for the first time, Adrienne Carver, Executive Director of Equality New Mexico. Thanks for being here, Adrienne. Really appreciate it. Now, Merritt, starting with you. Representative Pierce praised Judge Kavanaugh's long list of accomplishments. And the judge has a long paper trail that Democrats are going to be, parsing through. Your sense of the pick, let's start with the overall, your sense of the pick. We'll talk about things like Roe and stuff in a little bit, but your overall feel about this pick by the president.
Well, I think a Republican president could have nominated Margaret Sanger and the Democrats and the left would go nuts. That's the level of dialogue we have now. It's been going on for 30 years. Everybody hates the opposition's nominee. I don't think there's a lot of there to go after Kavanaugh with. I don't think the special counsel opinion is what people originally tend to think it is on first glance. I certainly don't think he's done anything that would speak to overturning larger laws. I think he's going to be a conservative justice. We don't know if he's going to be an activist. We don't know if he's going to prefer judicial restraint. And let's remember, we've all been kind of surprised by John Roberts. So
fair enough.
I think the jury's really out on this one, and I don't think a Supreme Court pick is going to do much for midterm elections.
Okay. Adrienne, your sense of the pick as well. Do you agree with Merritt on the generalities here, or is there something here about him that...
No, for me, I think that any of the people on the president's short list will be detrimental to the values in our communities here in New Mexico. These were lists of people that were chosen by radical right groups that seek to divide us and to use the courts to oppress and discriminate against us. This is a long-term strategy.
Is this pick for you from that list palatable?
For me, no.
Okay.
We see Kavanaugh as a pick who is going to help bring us back to skim milk marriage, where it's going to provide undue burden on LGBTQ couples to get a marriage license. We're going to see the slow erasure and erosion of our rights and liberties if Kavanaugh is confirmed.
Mary T. Torres, a follow-up on that, if you would. We're going to get to this in a second after I finish with Eric. The idea that it's a big unknown.
Right.
You never really know with any pick how they're going to
That's
do
correct.
anything, because past is not a guarantee of future performance, as they say. What's your sense of the pick?
Well, I think that everyone thought that Justice Kennedy, when he was appointed 30 years ago, would be conservative, and he was the swing vote. So he went both ways, and most people really respected that, But he does have a body of writings because of his time on the D.C. Circuit that they are going to have to really look at. And I think that that's what the Democrats are saying. Look, you're not going to be able to give us the, quote, bum's rush and get this through, because he's got a boatload of documents. And his opinions are like Judge Browning's. They're so lengthy. We've got to go through all of them and focus on them. So we don't really know. But I will tell you, I thought he did a great job on his opening remarks. He hit all of the marks. I think that he's clearly qualified for it. He's on the D.C. Circuit, so we will see. I don't think the Democrats are going to be able to defeat him.
Interesting
so he's
point
going to
there.
be the judge.
Yeah. Eric, when you look at the man's background, he'd worked under the first Bush administration. He had been part of the Ken Starr Whitewater team going way back. There's a lot of things about him that are kind of interesting. So your overall sense, and we might as well get going on things like Roe, LGBT rights, that Adrienne just mentioned. Let's just go there now. Your sense of the pick, and do you see danger here from your point of view?
Well, my biggest concern is he's clearly a partisan. He's been in every major purely partisan battle. So if this is about draining the swamp, there's not a more sort of swampy nominee that he could have picked. My concern for him, Roe is obviously a big concern, but there's a number of other issues where he has systematically chosen to sort of try to rein in the regulatory and the sort of, he claims to be a strong supporter of the executive branch, at the same time really sort of undermining whether it's consumer protection or environmental institutions that are really supposed to be regulating. So I think his judicial philosophy is very much small government, sort of disempower the very important institutions of regulation that really are where the rubber hits the road in terms of the Supreme Court decisions. There's the big rights, but there's really how much power do these bureaucratic institutions, regulatory institutions have to actually implement the law? Because that's the arm ultimately.
Right.
The judicial philosophy aside, that's where the rubber. And his decisions have been, and his opinions have really been, sort of not super partisan in terms of how he responds. Right. They've really sort of been these pragmatic. The issue isn't the politics. The issue is how it's administered, and I think that's going to be the tricky part in terms of figuring out where he's really going to come down to on things like Roe, where he's really going to come down civil rights and so on. So I think he's an enigma. But if you look at where he's been, he is a creature of the Washington Republican establishment.
Right.
Where they call him Beltway Brett, I think is his nickname. He's just of it. Let's swoop down Merritt Allen and get closer to home here and talk about New Mexico and how this pick could potentially affect us here. Do you see anything on the horizon? We've got some stuff out there on water issues. We've got some healthcare certainly. And this man has a track record on these things as well.
I don't necessarily feel comfortable saying that he's going to make a huge impact. We knew he was going to be a conservative pick. I mean,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
He's not as partisan and he's not as activist as we thought as we thought the White House might have nominated. The issue of the water lawsuit. I think the recent Florida lawsuit, as New Mexico Political Report noted, it's really who that special master is. Thank you.
Right.
It's the special master, and what we do see, to Eric's point, is he's much more focused on the executive branch, the congressional branch, having the powers, not the agencies. So I think he's going to be more focused in the laws that exist, and if it were to go back to the Supreme Court, I don't think he would find on the side of an agency.
Good point there. You know, Adrian, I appreciate that Merritt just brought up the Florida versus Georgia water case there. It's kind of complicated to get into right here, but basically it looks like the Supreme's maybe headed towards a more activist, I hate that word, but more, having their mitts in the situation about water rights between the states. Does that concern you at all when you watch this situation form, having a conservative tilting court on these types of issues?
Look, I think that any number of issues, including water, employment, housing, healthcare, justice, immigration, women's rights, the rights of students and businesses are all at stake here. Our rights and liberties are at stake. And to bring it back to New Mexico, this really is a tale of two Supreme Courts. We know that elections have consequences, and there will be 2 vacancies on the state Supreme Court in January, and the next governor is going to get the chance to appoint those 2 new justices. And for us at Equality New Mexico, we want Michelle Lujan Grisham to be able to make those appointments, because we know that any appointments that Steve Pearce would make would fundamentally shift the balance of power at the state Supreme Court. And so for us, this is an organizing moment. This is where we turn out our folks and our voters to make sure that what's happening at the federal level doesn't begin to happen at the state level.
Good point there. Let me ask all you guys, I'll start with Mary on this. I want to go back to Roe versus Wade.
Right.
It's the big topic, of course, with all this. Are we potentially, Mary Torres, scaring ourselves into a position here that may not even happen? Because if you look at the polling, about where Americans are at about legalized abortion, the numbers talk pretty loudly. This is what Americans support, even if they're not crazy about abortion.
Right.
The idea of illegal, you know what I'm saying? Back alley versus,
Sure, exactly.
It becomes, are we talking ourselves into something that potentially might not even happen?
Well, I don't know, because New Mexico is one of 10 states that has a statute in place that says abortion is not legal in this state.
Gotcha.
So, but for Roe versus Wade,
Right.
okay, so if Roe versus Wade is gone, you've got this statute there, okay? So, depending upon who the governor is that's elected, there will likely be legislation that is passed just to get rid of that statute, just in case Roe versus Wade is turned over. And we don't have a case now on the horizon that is looking like it's going to overturn Roe, but something tells me, come maybe November, there's going to be a case.
That's right.
There's going to be a case.
Miraculously, right.
Ta-da! It's going to be there, and it's going to be on the
That's right.
court's docket.
That's right. I appreciate that. About a minute and a half, Eric. Let's finish. Local stuff. Do you have concerns about local decisions that may come down from a right-leaning Supreme Court that could have local impact here? Anything about health care specifically? If they're going to follow the tack of the president, what he wants to do with the ACA. You know what I mean? This could be.
Well, that's why I'm so concerned about, yes, he's got a lot of decisions, but the arguments have always been sort of along these sort of very kind of procedural grounds and so on. So I'm a little worried that we don't know what we're going to get, for example, on some of these issues around the ACA, which for New Mexico, depending on how the court came down on some challenge, could really impact us given our reliance on Medicaid, given our reliance on how good the ACA has been for us. It's not perfect, but for states like New Mexico, poor states with a sort of underfunded healthcare system, it could be a major blow for us. And just on the Roe v. Wade thing quickly,
please.
There's we've been lucky to fight off the legislature a lot of other measures, waiting periods, parental involvement initiatives, and so on choice that we've been able to. But this issue that Mary just mentioned around making abortion itself illegal in New Mexico, it's been in the legislature for a few sessions now, and just trying to get it right, but we haven't been able to get it through. So this is why the November election is going to be really
governor.
right. Exactly. It's made. Yeah, it's exactly. So really, the election, to Adrian's point, the election is going to be really important on this because I think it's going to be at the top of the agenda if we have a Democratic governor. It's going to be vetoed if we have a Republican governor.
Good point there. We'll have to look forward to that. Now we'll have to wrap that there. When we come back to the line, we'll look at what the recent Supreme Court ruling on public sector unions will mean for New Mexico.